Senator Kerry, thank you for talking to us. Can I start by asking you about the current operation in Afghanistan? A very major offensive has started. Why is this so important?
Well, it's important for a number of reasons. First of all, there is a very significant Afghan component to what is happening. And the key to the American presence in Afghanistan today is not for us to be there for ourselves. It's to empower the government that has been chosen by the people to be able to stand up its army, stand up its civilian ability to deliver services, and to be free of the violence and oppression of extremist forces, the Taliban.
There have been many offensives like this before, though, in Helmand, and they've all failed. The Taliban has either melted away and then come back planting IEDs a few months later. Why is this going to be different?
Well, it's very different in concept. People need to remember that for 8 years, the war in Afghanistan went on, but it was really a repetition of the same war each year. It didn't have an adequate strategy because of the diversion to Iraq. Many of us were very opposed to what we were doing in Iraq. We thought it was wrong, we thought it was a waste of money and so forth. But we are where we are today, and we're now drawing down our troops. So the attention is now focused on Afghanistan, which is the place where al-Qaeda planned and plotted the attacks against the United States and continues to plan in Western Pakistan against many parts of the world. So it's important because now there is a strategy. Now there is a much greater effort for the Afghans to be in the lead, for the Afghan army to be part of the operation, for the Afghan police to come in immediately underneath, for Afghan political government leadership to immediately take charge and be involved in the delivery of services, for additional civilian services to come in. We want the emphasis not to be on the military. There is no military solution. We want the emphasis to be on the ability of the Afghan people to take control of their own lives.
You mentioned al-Qaeda, but you said al-Qaeda were in northwestern Pakistan. There aren't any al-Qaeda, or only a handful in Afghanistan, are there?
Well, I agree with that. They come and go. There aren't great numbers, and that is why Pakistan is such an important component of what is happening. I would argue that Afghanistan will be more affected by what happens in Pakistan than by some of these operations, as necessary as they are. But there is a coordination, a very clear and definite coordination between the extreme elements of the Taliban, the political elements, and al-Qaeda. And that does cross the border into Afghanistan, and none of us are prepared to allow that to develop into a sanctuary or become a place where people can train with impunity to attack not just the United States, but to attack people all across the world. People need to remember, more Muslims have died at the hands of al-Qaeda than anyone else. More children and women who are innocent have died at the hands of al-Qaeda. And so, I think everybody in this region and across the world has to understand that those of us who want to live in a world that's peaceful, ruled by law, where life is respected, need to stand up at this moment and not allow violent extremist forces to do what they want to do.
Now, a Taliban spokesman has told Al Jazeera in the last few hours 15,000 men involved in taking a small village in Helmand. They then said, how many men will it need for all of Helmand, how many for all of Afghanistan? Doesn't this show the weakness of the international forces?
No, I disagree, and I think that whoever that spokesperson is trying to put a good light on a bad situation. It is very, very clear that the Taliban are uneasy about what is happening. Many of the Taliban are simply unemployed young people. Many of them are people who are intimidated by the Taliban and who are protecting their families or doing something else. There's a very strong belief that as the Afghan forces come in, as Afghan leadership replaces the Taliban and then delivers safety, security, services, seed, livestock, the ability of people to have water, these kinds of things, that people will realize there's a benefit to having this kind of transformation. And as that happens, I think the Taliban are going to have a harder and harder time finding support for their brand of extreme oppression.
At the London conference just a few weeks ago, all the talk was about talking to the Taliban. Now we're fighting the Taliban again. There seem to be two different strategies here.
No, I disagree with that also. We are prepared to have conversations with those Taliban who want to change their behavior, who want to get out from under the thumb of the oppressive, extremist, more ideological, group of Taliban. But many people feel, as I said, thousands of Taliban are just young people who are being paid, or young people without a job whose families have been intimidated, who therefore sign up. If they're offered an alternative, if their local district, tribal leaders begin to assert themselves and show that they're prepared to defend their safety, then I think a lot of people are going to change their behavior. The hardcore ideological extremist Taliban is a much smaller group. And yes, they're going to be tougher, and no, we're not going to turn them, and no, we're not going to talk to them. But thousands of Taliban, I believe, would quickly come around if their own government began to behave better. Many of the Taliban were created in the last years because of the failures of the Karzai government and because of the inability of the national government to deliver services at a local level. If that can begin to change, and I repeat, this is the first time we've had a strategy to try to change that. If that can change, then hopefully many people will find that they don't need to associate themselves with the broader word Taliban.
Is there a limit to this policy? Would you eventually see a situation where Mullah Omar could be round the table, or the Haqqani network, who are very close to Al-Qaeda? Could you ever talk to people like that?
They would have to indicate a willingness to give up violence and a willingness to embrace the rights that are represented in the politics of Afghanistan today. For instance, the rights of women, the rights of children to go to school, and so forth. But yes, there is room ultimately for reconciliation if people are prepared to say that they're going to live by a certain standard. Many Taliban, many people who call themselves Taliban, not in the Mullah Omar group, but some of the broader group, and I'm sure you've seen them in Afghanistan, would tell you that their anger and their dissatisfaction is not inherently against the United States or against the ISAF forces, but it's really an anger that after 8 years, the government of Afghanistan hasn't appeared to be working for them. And so they've gone to the only place where they think there may be an alternative voice. It's our belief that if we can do a better job of helping the Afghans to deliver government that is not corrupt and that actually works for the people, that the people will quickly link themselves with that government. And secondly, many people understand how violently excessive the Taliban that used to govern Afghanistan was. Gathering people in a soccer stadium to stone somebody to death, banning music, banning dance, banning, women from going to school. All these kinds of things. That's not the way the people of Afghanistan want to live.
You are one of the leading figures on the global stage, one of the leading US senators, a former soldier, former peace activist. I want your assessment. What are the chances, what percentage chance of success for America now in Afghanistan, given that there is now a time frame imposed by the president and troops pulling out in 18 months' time? Is it possible to turn it around?
First of all, let me emphasize that this is not a sudden departure of troops next year in July. If the situation permits it, there will begin to be a drawdown of some troops. But the United States is not about to abandon Afghanistan or abandon Pakistan or the region. As long as the region is prepared to invest in its own future For instance, in Pakistan today, the Pakistan army is taking on violent extremist radicals in Swat, in South Waziristan, etc., and they're having great success. As long as they're willing to take a stake in their own future, we want to be prepared to help them. So I think that we're not. This is not about us. This is about Afghanistan and about Pakistan fighting for their own future. Pakistan is a democracy. Pakistan had an election last year in which, for the first time in its history, the president of the country gave up power at the ballot box to another person elected, and they had a peaceful transition of power. That's what we're invested in. And we're there, we don't have troops on the ground. We're not fighting in Pakistan, but we are helping the Pakistanis to be able to fight for their own country, for their own democracy.